So we had the Nintendo Direct this past week, and we had a couple of big announcements out of it, one of which had to do with Nintendo Switch Online. And if you've been following the channel here for a little while with Newswave, that's probably wasn't too surprising to see Nintendo 64 and then hear about a higher price tier, as that's something we've been speculating on for what feels like months now, that Nintendo would have to do things around pricing for Nintendo Switch Online if they were going to add different games to it. And now that they've at least talked about plans to raise the price with a new tier, it does bring up an interesting future, I'll say, for the Nintendo Switch Online. And I think this is just the start of what could become its own service going forward in the future, potentially in the next generation. I want to talk about that here today. Guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the SpawnWave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first, let's go over to the website that Nintendo set up here. This is for the announcement around the Nintendo Switch Online with Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis. I do believe that the big thing people were getting excited for is Nintendo 64. There already is like a Genesis collection you can get, and actually a lot of the Genesis games that are being offered under this service are already available in different ways on like the Switch, but we do have a selection of games here for the Nintendo 64. New membership plan that's coming in late October. I did notice that they didn't talk about anything with pricing other than for the controller in this presentation with the Direct. It almost seems like it could be, I don't want to say bad news, but it might be more than we were expecting when it comes to price. My thought around this expansion pack that they're doing, which, again, good marketing by Nintendo for that to kind of bring back the expansion pack title, or the name, which, of course, was the RAM expander for your Nintendo 64. You'd have to buy it for certain games like Majora's Mask, or if you wanted the entirety of Perfect Dark, which was including the single player, you would need that expansion pack. Donkey Kong 64 was another one. There were a few that had graphical enhancements as well for resolution, for example. But that is how they are going to get you Nintendo 64 games. You have to actively decide that you want to increase the price for Nintendo Switch Online. And I do think that the signups for this specific membership is going to tell Nintendo if this is kind of the route they should take with this whole thing. But I do believe things are going to look very different for Nintendo Switch Online 5, even 10 years down the road. But like the selection of games they have here: Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Star Fox, Ocarina of Time, Mario Tennis, Sin and Punishment, which is pretty cool. I believe that Sin and Punishment really didn't get talked about much because it was Sin and Punishment, and there are just a lot of people who didn't play it on the 64. But obviously, you see Mario Kart 64, you hear about the idea of online play. It's exciting for people because Nintendo did what Nintendo does best. That's hit you in the nostalgia bone hard. Make you think back to those days where maybe you were up all night with some friends around an old CRT TV with the Nintendo 64 and 4 cables running across the floor, and you're all sitting there playing Mario Kart 64 together. To be able to kind of reenact that almost just with online play, and even the controller that's $50, well, that's, again, what Nintendo was aiming to do here. Genesis, like I said, not as compelling, I feel like. I mean, yeah, they have like a Golden Axe and Bloodlines. That was pretty cool. I think the big one is Musha, because that's a pretty expensive game, and it's not really one you find anywhere, I believe, in any real collections or anything. But I think a lot of these games are already in things like that Sega Genesis collection that's currently offered. And then we have the Nintendo 64 controller, along with the 3-button Genesis controller, and I believe in Japan they're getting the 6-button. Not really sure why that's not the case everywhere. Anyway, they had some screenshots here which look pretty good. Look like the Nintendo 64 game, right? But the biggest thing here is going forward with Nintendo Switch Online. One of the things I had mentioned a lot is that Nintendo is viewing their online service currently as having that library of games attached to it for the foreseeable future. And it's sort of a shame because it's pretty obvious Nintendo is looking at this and saying, you know, that's not enough money for Nintendo 64 games, even $20 a year. So they're going to be going up in price. And it tells us that there is a barrier here when it comes to that pricing for Nintendo to go all out. Like, people want GameCube games. Well, that's probably not going to happen even at this expansion pack pricing that's introduced. That would probably be another tier on top of this. See, I think if Nintendo's online service was good enough to stand on its own, Nintendo probably could have created their own Netflix-like service, and I do think that's where they're going to head with this, because it will grow and grow and grow if that is kind of the path they end up going here with, and the 64 expansion pack works well, to where it's a $10 a month plan, and there is a large library of games that are included. You could go with GameCube, Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo, Nintendo Virtual Boy, Game Boy. You get crazy with it. You could throw like the Lynx, TurboGrafx. We have Sega Genesis, Master System, Game Gear. That's the biggest thing that we really found out with this, is that it doesn't have to just be Nintendo platforms. We also found out that Nintendo and Microsoft seem to come to terms around some of those older Rare titles, as Banjo-Kazooie is going to be added to the 64 as we go along here in the coming months. And that, of course, alongside of classics like Paper Mario, which is great to see that get added in. They'll have the Kirby Nintendo 64 title, as well as Majora's Mask and F-Zero X. Can you imagine F-Zero X with online play? That is going to be an absolute blast. But having Rare involved with Microsoft in partnership with Nintendo to bring a game like Banjo-Kazooie, I assume Banjo-Tooie will follow suit, maybe Jet Force Gemini, but the big one that I am now thinking about, and it's possible, depending on how things go, I guess, between Microsoft and Nintendo, GoldenEye. Could we actually see GoldenEye get added in here to the Nintendo Switch Online service? I feel like Perfect Dark is like a layup that's probably going to happen, but like GoldenEye is the big one. It'd be Nintendo, I believe MGM is the other company, and then Microsoft. And at least the word that was going around, the reason it didn't come out is because of Nintendo. Nintendo didn't want that on any other platform other than a Nintendo platform. Well, here we are now with Microsoft talking with Nintendo for something like Banjo-Kazooie, which should be a series that Microsoft gets behind completely. We should have a new Banjo-Kazooie, all of this stuff. But I guess in the meantime, sure, put it on the online service. I think Perfect Dark's coming because that makes sense to really showcase Perfect Dark, get people talking about it again, heading into the new Perfect Dark. But GoldenEye, that would be something. That would be a big-time announcement that get people very excited, because it would probably have online play as well through Nintendo Switch Online. Now, coming back to the Nintendo Switch Online service, it is $20 a year for the basic service. It's Nintendo and Super Nintendo. And I do see a lot of people say, well, I don't even really want the retro games. I just want there to be more features for the online service. And Nintendo is so weird when it comes to this. I think they are doing their best to be quote-unquote family-friendly or just responsible for everyone that's on the platform. And they're even to the point where they're concerned about having people just message each other and talk to each other through voice chat on a lot of these games when you're not using a cell phone. It's Nintendo, like I said, going a bit farther than they probably have to when it comes to protection of their Nintendo brand. It's Nintendo and online. It's never really mixed. If it did, they would probably be able to offer a complete online service at $20 a year, and everyone would look at it and say, well, I pay $60 a year for the PlayStation and the Xbox. $20 is a third of the price. I'm used to it now. It's been normalized. I'll go ahead and do that. And then you would have that separate subscription that would be like a Netflix service, $10 a month with a ton of games to pick from, up to the GameCube. Maybe they get crazy and even go up to the Wii. I mean, why not? The Joy-Cons have motion controls and all. I'm sure they could figure that out. But unfortunately, Nintendo is using the online selection of games that they have with this catalog kind of as a crutch for their online service to make it feel like it's worth it. And now they're going to see if this plan at $30 a year, $40 a year maybe, is interesting enough for people to sign up just for Nintendo 64 games, and yes, technically Genesis games. The part that's weird to me about this whole situation is that Nintendo seems to have a lack of interest almost when it comes to improving the basic online service that they offer for the Switch at that $20 a year tier. You figured if they keep showing up with more and more games, that eventually they'd show up with more and more functionality for their service. People have been asking for basics like be able to message their friends or just do more when it comes to interactions online, like with native voice chat. I know people have asked for achievements, just all these different things that would at least work to add more value from the functionality standpoint. Instead, they showed up with a more expensive tier and Nintendo 64 and Genesis games. It's cool to see 64 games get added, but it's just weird that Nintendo is not building up their online service at the basic level in the meantime so that they can eventually decouple the online service from their selection of games. I mean, then it would be kind of a win-win. Nintendo would get this service that they can charge more for, and people would actually be happier with the online service. No one really likes to pay for the online service for these different consoles, but it's at least become accepted for Sony and Microsoft, and even Nintendo at $20 a year with basic functionality that we've expected now for the past 2 decades would at least be much more accepting overall, and you wouldn't have as many complaints as you do now. But Nintendo having to raise the price to a new tier mostly just adds confirmation to what I've been saying for a little while now, and that is the biggest barrier when it comes to adding something like Nintendo 64 is just the price. It's just $20 a year for Nintendo is too cheap to add something like Nintendo 64 games, and going up to GameCube will probably cost more. I just hope we get to a point where Nintendo revamps their online service, at least to where it feels like, okay, $20 a year, I can do all the basic functionality that my original Xbox did back in 2002, and then we have this Netflix-like service next to it. I do believe that's where we are trending towards, and that's something we will see probably years, maybe even a decade into the future. And I wouldn't be shocked, I'll say this now, if that service showed up on cell phones and maybe even on PC. I think it would be a ton of revenue for Nintendo to get, certainly a big-time revenue stream for them at $10 a month. And I still think Nintendo would be Nintendo and keep it off of PlayStation and Xbox, obviously, but it would just be a way for them to really push this service out to more people, bring in more money, and hopefully have more offerings for what would probably be one of the best gaming subscriptions ever. It would be like their own Game Pass, leveraging their legacy software that people are just out there downloading anyway, so might as well take advantage of it that way. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below, specifically Nintendo 64 being added to the online service at a higher price tier. How much do you think it's going to cost, and are you going to sign up for this expansion pack service? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.